They pushed my wheelchair into the lake and said, "She drowned. Now we get the $11 million." It was supposed to be the end of me. It was a true story. I can swim. And the camera. The water was not merely cold, it was a physical assault. A crushing weight of approximately 4 degrees Celsius that slammed into my chest and sucked the oxygen from my lungs in a single, violent gasp. I remember the sound of the splash, a chaotic, churning noise that seemed deafening in the silence of the private lake, followed immediately by the muffled, distorted silence of submersion. I sank rapidly, the heavy motorized wheelchair, a Tangent X model weighing 215 pounds, dragging me down toward the silt and decay of the lake floor. My eyes were open, stinging in the murky water, and I saw the surface receding, a shimmering ceiling of light that was rapidly becoming unreachable. Above me, distorted by the refraction of the water, I saw two silhouettes standing on the edge of the dock. They were blurred, wavering shapes, but I knew exactly who they were. One was Julian, my husband of 6 years, wearing the beige cashmere sweater I had bought him for his 35th birthday. The other was Elena, my live-in nurse, the woman who had been spoon-feeding me soup and brushing my hair for the last 8 months, following the car accident that had supposedly left me a paraplegic. I held my breath, my lungs burning, and as the chair hit the bottom, kicking up a cloud of mud, I heard their voices. Sound travels poorly from air to water, but the depth was shallow enough here, perhaps 10 feet, and the adrenaline had sharpened my senses to a preternatural degree. I heard Julian's voice, booming and triumphant. "She drowned. It's done." And then Elena's voice, higher, shrill with excitement. "Are you sure? Did you see her go under?" Julian laughed, a sound I had once loved, now twisted into something grotesque. "Look at the bubbles, Elena. She's strapped in. She can't move. We get the $11 million. It's over. We're free." They turned and walked away. I watched their distorted footprints vibrate on the wooden planks of the dock before they disappeared from my line of sight. They believed I was dead. They believed I was a helpless cripple, a woman whose spinal cord had been severed at the L2 vertebrae, leaving her legs useless and her life dependent on their mercy. They were wrong on both counts. What they didn't know, what I had kept hidden from them for the last 3 months through a display of agonizing self-control and secret, midnight training sessions, was that my paralysis had been temporary. The diagnosis of permanent damage had been a misinterpretation of the initial swelling. My sensation had returned 4 months ago. My motor function had returned 3 months ago. I could swim. I fumbled with the buckle of the chest strap, my fingers numb and clumsy in the freezing water. The mechanism was a quick-release safety latch, legally required for medical devices, a detail Julian had overlooked in his arrogance. I snapped it open. I pushed myself away from the chair, kicking my legs hard. The muscles in my calves and thighs, which I had been secretly rehabilitating by doing isometric exercises while they slept, fired with a desperate, burning power. I shot toward the surface, breaking the water with a gasp that I stifled instantly, clamping a hand over my mouth. I treaded water silently, hidden by the thick cluster of reeds that lined the bank, shivering violently as the hypothermia began its insidious clock. I watched as Julian and Elena walked back up the gravel path toward the main house, a sprawling 4,000-square-foot Victorian estate that had been in my family for 3 generations. They were holding hands. Julian stopped, pulled her close, and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was the kiss of 2 conspirators sealing a blood pact. I felt a nausea that had nothing to do with the lake water. I swam to the far bank, the one opposite the house, where the woods were dense and the ground was marshy. I dragged myself out of the water. My clothes, heavy wool trousers, and a thick cardigan weighed 50 pounds, soaking wet. I crawled into the underbrush, lying flat on the decaying leaves, shaking so hard my teeth clattered together like stones. I had to move. I had to get warm. But more importantly, I had to think. The timeline of their betrayal began to reassemble itself in my mind with the cold precision of a forensic audit. It had started 8 months ago with the accident. I had been driving my Tesla Model S on a rainy Tuesday. The brakes had failed. I had slammed into a guardrail at 65 miles per hour. The police report cited mechanical failure due to poor maintenance, which I had found odd because I serviced the car religiously every 3 months. I spent 6 weeks in the ICU, followed by 3 months in a rehabilitation center, and then I was sent home, confined to the chair, told by Julian that the doctors said I would never walk again. I realized now, lying in the mud, that Julian had likely been the one to speak to the doctors. He had been the filter for all my information. He had hired Elena, a woman with impeccable references that I had never actually checked because I trusted him implicitly. They had kept me sedated, isolated, and dependent, and the motive was the money. My father had left me a trust fund and a patent portfolio for a pharmaceutical filtration system that generated royalties of approximately $1.2 million annually. The principal value of the estate was valued at exactly $11.4 million. In the event of my death, Julian was the sole beneficiary. If I divorced him, he got nothing due to the ironclad prenuptial agreement my father's lawyers had drafted. So, divorce was not an option for him. Widowhood was. I checked my watch. It was a Garmin Phoenix 7, waterproof to 100 meters. The time was 3:14 p.m. The date was November 14th. I had been in the water for less than 4 minutes. I forced myself to stand. My legs wobbled, weak from the cold and the atrophy that I hadn't fully conquered, but they held. I was alive, and I was angry. The anger was a small, hot coal in the center of my freezing chest. I stripped off the heavy cardigan and wrung it out, putting it back on for what little insulation it offered. I began to walk, sticking to the tree line, moving parallel to the road that led away from the estate. I couldn't go to the police, not yet. Julian was a charming man. He was a pillar of the community, a member of the Rotary Club, a man who donated to the local sheriff's re-election campaign. If I showed up, hysterical and soaking wet, claiming my husband pushed me into a lake, he would spin it. He would say I was suicidal. He would say the accident had affected my brain. He would say I drove the chair in myself. Elena would corroborate him. They would have me committed, and then, in the sterile safety of a psychiatric ward, they would find a way to finish what they started. I needed proof. I needed undeniable, irrefutable evidence. I needed to get to the city. I walked for 3 miles. My feet were numb blocks of ice. I reached the service station on Route 9 at 4:45 p.m. I went around the back to the restrooms, avoiding the cashier. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror. My hair was matted with lake algae. My lips were blue. I looked like a corpse that had walked out of a grave, which, in a sense, I was. I used the hand dryer to warm my core, pressing my stomach against the warm plastic nozzle until the shivering subsided to a manageable tremor. I had no money. My wallet was in the bag attached to the wheelchair at the bottom of the lake, but I had my mind. I had my memory. And I had a memorized credit card number for an emergency corporate account that Julian didn't know about. I walked to the payphone outside. It was one of the few remaining functional payphones in the county. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. It rang 4 times. A gruff male voice answered. Start talking, or I hang up. It was Reynolds. He was a private investigator, a former forensic accountant for the FBI who had been fired for his aggressive methods. I had hired him 5 years ago to audit a competitor, and we had maintained a professional, if distant, respect. It's Clara, I said. My voice was raspy, unrecognizable even to myself. Clara Thorne. There was a pause. Clara, I heard you were incapacitated. Why are you calling me from a payphone in? I heard the click of keys as he likely traced the number. Garrisonville? I need a pickup, I said. No questions. No police. I need a safe house, and I need a medical kit. Bring a change of clothes, size 4, and a laptop with a satellite uplink. Reynolds didn't ask why. He didn't ask if I was okay. He simply asked, where exactly? Behind the Shell station on Route 9. The old loading dock. Come in the van, not the sedan. ETA 40 minutes, he said, and the line went dead. I sat on a stack of wooden pallets behind the station, hidden from the road, and waited. As the adrenaline faded, the physical reality of my situation set in. My legs were burning with a lactic acid buildup that felt like liquid fire. My back, the site of the original injury, was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache. But beneath the pain, my mind was racing, cataloging the assets I had, the assets they thought they had, and the timeline of the murder. They would wait until dark to call the police. They would need time to stage the scene. They would probably say, I went for a stroll by the lake and slipped. They would scrub the house of any evidence of a struggle. They would act the part of the grieving husband and the devastated nurse. They would cry on camera. They would plan the funeral. They were probably opening a bottle of champagne right now, toasting to their future. The thought made me clench my fists so hard my fingernails dug into my palms. The van arrived at 5:32 p.m. It was a nondescript gray cargo van with a magnetic sign on the side that read, Al's Plumbing. Reynolds opened the back doors. He was a short, thick-set man with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and left out in the rain. He took one look at me, wet, shivering, covered in mud, and his expression didn't change. Get in, he said. He handed me a thermal blanket and a thermos of coffee. I climbed in. The back of the van was a mobile command center filled with screens and servers. I wrapped the blanket around myself and drank the coffee black. It scalded my throat, and it was the best thing I had ever tasted. Talk, Reynolds said as he pulled onto the highway, heading south toward the city. They tried to kill me, I said. Julian and Elena. They pushed the chair into the lake. Reynolds watched me in the rearview mirror. For the money? The 11 million, I confirmed. They think I drowned. They think I'm paralyzed, Reynolds grunted. Standard play. Stupid, but standard. What do you want to do? Go to the cops? No, I said. The cops will bungle it. Julian has the sheriff in his pocket. I want to burn them. I want to destroy them so thoroughly that when I finally let the police have them, they'll beg for a cell just to get away from me. Reynolds smiled, a rare, terrifying expression that showed too many teeth. That's the spirit. What's the play? First, I need to stay dead, I said. Let them report it. Let them find the empty chair. Let them drag the lake. If they don't find a body, they'll panic, but they'll assume the current took me. There's a drainage pipe that leads to the river. They'll hope I'm washed out to sea. We let them sweat. And then we start the discovery, I said. I need access to Julian's emails. I need to know where they plan to move the money. I need to know how long they've been planning this. Reynolds tapped the steering wheel. That's easy. I can clone his phone if we get within 50 feet of him, but we need hard evidence of the act. Did anyone see it? No, I said. Just us. And then I stopped. A memory flashed in my mind. The wheelchair. The Titangent X model. It was a high-end medical device, customized for my needs. Julian had insisted on the top-of-the-line model with all the accessories. One of those accessories was a safety feature I had found annoying but tolerated. A black box data logger and a forward-facing sensory camera mounted on the armrest, designed to record obstacles for insurance claims in case of a collision. It was small, discreet, and looked like a sensor. It was set to loop record every 6 hours. It was waterproof. Reynolds, I said, sitting up straighter. The chair. What about it? It's at the bottom of the lake. It has a camera, I said. A safety cam. It records to an internal SD card, but it also has a cellular backup for cloud sync if the impact sensor is triggered. Hitting the water. That might have triggered the impact sensor. Reynolds' eyes met mine in the mirror. If it uploaded, we have the video of them pushing you. It depends on the signal, I said. The lake house has a Wi-Fi extender on the dock. If the chair connected before it went under. Reynolds pulled a laptop from the passenger seat and handed it to me. What's the login for the cloud account? My fingers flew across the keyboard. I logged into the medical supply portal. The interface was clunky, blue and white text. I navigated to device history. I found the serial number, TX994 Alpha. I clicked logs. The screen refreshed. My heart hammered against my ribs. Connection status, lost. Last sync, November 14th, 3:12 p.m. Event triggered, sudden deceleration, impact. Upload status, complete. I clicked the file. It buffered for a second, the spinning wheel of death mocking me. Then the video popped up. It was grainy, fisheye footage from the armrest perspective. It showed the wooden planks of the dock. It showed Julian's shoes, expensive Italian loafers. It showed Elena's sneakers. It heard the audio, crisp and clear. She drowned. It's done. And then, the motion, the violent shove, the sky spinning, the splash, the water rushing over the lens, the bubbles, the murky darkness, and then silence. I paused the video. I looked at Reynolds. I have it, I whispered. I have everything. Reynolds nodded. Okay, that's the nuke. But we don't drop the nuke yet. We let them get comfortable. We let them think they won. I closed the laptop. The shivering had stopped, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. I wasn't Clara the victim anymore. I was Clara, the witness, the judge, and the executioner. Take me to the safe house, I said. I need to plan my funeral. We drove into the city as the sun went down, disappearing into the anonymity of the millions. Back at the lake, the water would be settling, the ripples gone, the surface glass smooth, hiding the secrets beneath. But the camera had seen it all, and soon, the world would see it too. But first, I was going to make them suffer. I was going to make them believe in ghosts. The safe house was a converted loft in a defunct textile factory in the meatpacking district, a space of exposed brick and industrial noise that Reynolds had leased under a shell corporation. It smelled of ozone and stale takeout, a stark contrast to the lavender-scented, climate-controlled prison of my estate. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. For the next 72 hours, I did not sleep. I existed in the blue glow of Reynolds' server bank, watching the life I had left behind unravel on 6 high-definition monitors. We had tapped into everything: the Nest cameras in the hallways, the Ring doorbell, the Alexa units in the kitchen and master bedroom, and even the internal microphone of Julian's Tesla. I was a ghost in my own home, a digital poltergeist hovering over the people who had tried to drown me. I watched as the search and rescue teams dragged the lake. I saw the sheriff's boats, their red and blue lights reflecting off the black water, crisscrossing the spot where I had gone under. I listened to the police radio scanner Reynolds had patched in. Asterisk. No body recovered yet, Sheriff. Just the chair. We found the chair at 0900 hours. Empty. Harness unbuckled. Asterisk. That was the first crack in their narrative. I saw Julian standing on the dock when the divers hauled the Titangent X out of the silt. The color drained from his face. He had expected a body strapped to the seat, a gruesome anchor to secure his fortune. Instead, he had an empty wheelchair and a mystery. He grabbed Elena's arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. I zoomed in on the feed. Asterisk. Where is she? Asterisk. I saw him mouth the words. Elena looked terrified. Asterisk. She couldn't have swum. You said her legs were dead. You said she was dead. Asterisk. They began to panic, but quietly, hiding their terror behind the masks of grieving loved ones. Sheriff Brody, a man who had attended our holiday parties and drank my husband's scotch, approached them. He took his hat off. Asterisk. Julian, I'm sorry. The current in the channel is strong this time of year. If she slipped out of the harness, she might have been swept into the river system. It could take weeks to find her. Asterisk. Julian nodded, forcing tears. He was a good actor. I gave him that. He rubbed his eyes, his shoulders shaking. Asterisk. I just want her back, Brody. I just want to say goodbye. Asterisk. I sat in the loft, eating cold noodles from a carton, and felt a cold, hard laughter bubbling in my chest. You'll get your chance to say goodbye, Julian. Just not the way you think. The waiting game was agonizing, but essential. I needed them to commit to the lie. I needed them to file the paperwork. 2 days later, the search was called off. I was officially listed as missing, presumed drowned. That was the signal Julian had been waiting for. On day 4, while I was doing push-ups on the concrete floor to rehabilitate my atrophied triceps, Reynolds called out from the desk. He's moving on the money. I walked over to the monitors. We had a keylogger on Julian's laptop. He was logged into the portal for the life insurance company, the Hartford. He was filling out the claim form for the policy, a $5 million payout that triggered upon accidental death. He was also emailing the executor of my trust, asking for an emergency dispersion of funds to cover the search costs and memorial expenses. He was greedy. He wasn't waiting for the body. He wasn't waiting for the death certificate. He was trying to cash out immediately. This was the leverage I needed. If he accepted the money, it was wire fraud. If he spent the money, it was theft. I turned to Reynolds. Let him file it, but block the approval. Flag it in the system as pending investigation. Make him sweat. Reynolds typed a few commands. Done. I've injected a flag into the insurance database. It'll look like a routine compliance check. They won't pay out for at least 90 days without without a body. I smiled. 90 days was an eternity for a man with Julian's debts. That was another discovery we had made. Julian wasn't just greedy, he was broke. The investments he had been managing for the last 3 years were a series of disastrous crypto speculations and high-risk venture capital plays that had evaporated. He owed $300,000 to a private lender in the city, and the interest was compounding daily. He needed my death not just for the luxury, but for survival. The funeral, or rather the memorial service for Clara Thorne, was scheduled for the following Sunday. It was to be held at the estate in the garden overlooking the lake. The audacity was breathtaking. They were going to bury an empty casket in the family plot, right next to my parents, within sight of the murder weapon. I decided I would attend. Not in person, of course. That was for the finale. I would attend digitally, but I would also make my presence felt. Reynolds and I spent the night before the funeral preparing the haunting. We accessed the smart home controls. We programmed a sequence of events designed to trigger specific psychological stressors. We adjusted the thermostat in the master bedroom to 62 degrees, the temperature of the lake water. We set the Sonos sound system to play a specific track at random intervals. Water Music by Handel, the piece that had been playing in the car right before my accident. We also gained access to the digital projector they planned to use for the photo montage at the memorial. Reynolds uploaded a new file. "Are you sure about this?" Reynolds asked, his finger hovering over the enter key. "It's risky. If they figure out it's a hack, they'll know you're alive." I shook my head. "They won't think it's a hack. They're narcissists. They'll think it's a glitch or their own guilty consciences manifesting. Fear makes people irrational. I want them irrational." The day of the memorial was overcast. The sky a bruised purple that matched the mood I was orchestrating. I watched the feed from the security cameras. Cars were lining up down the long driveway. The local elite were there in their black coats and somber faces. I saw friends I had known since childhood, people who were genuinely crying, people who believed the lie. It hurt to see them grieving for me, to see the pain I was causing by staying dead. But I reminded myself that this was necessary surgery. To cut out the cancer, you have to open the wound. Julian stood at the entrance, shaking hands. He looked weary, tragic, perfect. Elena was by his side, not touching him, playing the role of the devoted employee. But I saw the way her eyes lingered on him, the way she positioned herself as the lady of the manor. She was wearing my pearl necklace, the strand of South Sea pearls my mother had given me for my wedding. The sight of it around her neck, resting against her black dress, made my vision blur with rage. That necklace was supposed to be for my daughter, if I ever had one. Elena had stolen my life, and now she was looting my corpse before it was even cold. The service began at 2 p.m. A minister spoke about my kindness, my resilience after the accident. Then Julian took the podium. I turned up the volume on the speakers in the loft. "Clara was my light," he began, his voice hitching perfectly. "She fought so hard. She was in so much pain, but she never complained. I keep asking myself why I left her alone on the dock, why I walked away for just a moment to get her a blanket. It will haunt me for the rest of my life." A lie. He hadn't gone for a blanket. He had walked away to let me drown. I typed a command into the terminal. Asterisk execute protocol. Chill. Asterisk. In the house, the smart thermostat dropped the temperature in the living room, where the reception would be held, to 50 degrees. Then, I waited for the video montage. It was projected onto a large screen set up on the lawn. It started with photos of me as a child, then my graduation, then our wedding. Julian wiped a tear. The crowd murmured sympathetically. Then, the glitch hit. Reynolds had spliced in a single frame. It appeared for 1/30th of a second subliminal, barely registrable, but effective. It was a still frame from the wheelchair camera, the blurry, distorted image of Julian and Elena standing on the dock. It flashed on the screen and was gone, replaced instantly by a photo of me and my dog. Julian flinched. He blinked, looking around, but no one else seemed to have noticed. He rubbed his temple. He thought he was seeing things. 5 minutes later, it happened again. Another single frame. This time, it was the image of the bubbles rising in the water. Julian stopped speaking mid-sentence. He stared at the screen, his face pale. I'm sorry, he stammered. "I thought I saw," he trailed off. Elena stepped forward, touching his arm. "It's the grief, Julian. Sit down. I'll finish." She took the microphone. "He's exhausted," she told the crowd. "He hasn't slept. I watched them. They were cracking. The reception was a disaster. The house was freezing. Guests were shivering, complaining about the cold. The staff tried to adjust the thermostat, but I had locked them out of the system. Then, the music started. Water Music began to play softly through the house speakers. Julian was in the kitchen, pouring a drink. He froze. He looked at Elena. "Who put this on?" he hissed. "Turn it off. That was the song from the crash." Elena looked frantic. "I didn't touch it. The system is acting up." She went to the wall panel and jabbed at it. The volume increased. The majestic orchestral swells filled the room, drowning out the conversation. Julian smashed his glass into the sink. "Stop it!" he screamed. The guests in the living room went silent. Julian realized he had shouted. He composed himself, forcing a smile. "I'm sorry. It's just too many memories." He retreated to his study. I followed him on the camera. He poured a scotch, neat, his hands shaking so bad the bottle rattled against the glass. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. I listened in. It was the private lender. "I need more time, Vance," Julian pleaded. "The insurance is pending. They're dragging their feet. I need another week." The voice on the other end was cold. "You have 3 days, Julian, or we take the collateral. And the collateral is the house." Julian hung up and put his head in his hands. He was trapped. He couldn't sell the house because it was in probate. He couldn't get the insurance because of the investigation flag. He was sitting in a freezing mansion he didn't own, haunted by the wife he had murdered, owing money to sharks he couldn't pay. That night, after the guests had left and the house was dark, I made my first direct contact. I waited until 3 a.m. They were sleeping in the master bedroom, my bedroom. Julian and Elena, together in my bed. The disrespect was a physical nausea. I activated the Echo Dot on the bedside table. I didn't use a spooky voice. I used a recording. I had hundreds of hours of voice recordings from my dictaphone notes. Reynolds had used an AI synthesizer to stitch together a sentence using my exact vocal intonations. The room was silent. Then, my voice, clear and calm, cut through the darkness. Asterisk, Julian. The water is so cold. Asterisk, Julian woke up with a scream. He scrambled backward, falling off the bed, tangling in the sheets. Elena sat up, turning on the lamp. What is it? She spoke, Julian yelled, pointing at the speaker. She said the water is cold. Elena grabbed the device. It's off, Julian. Look, it's unplugged. She held up the cord. I had anticipated this. The device had a battery backup base. I triggered it again. Asterisk, Elena. Those pearls look heavy. They might drag you down. Asterisk, Elena screamed. This time, she ripped the necklace off, the clasp breaking, pearls scattering across the hardwood floor with the sound of falling hail. She threw the device across the room. It smashed against the wall. Someone is hacking us, she shrieked. It's not a ghost. It's a hacker. Julian stood up, breathing hard, his eyes wild. Who knows? We were alone. Maybe she's not dead, Elena whispered. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Julian grabbed her shoulders. Don't say that. We saw her go under. We saw the bubbles stop. She's dead. She has to be dead. Then who is doing this? Elena cried. Reynolds, Julian said, his eyes narrowing. Her old PI. He must have access. He's trying to blackmail us. We have to find him, Elena said. We have to stop him. They spent the next day tearing the house apart. They were looking for cameras, for microphones. They found nothing because Reynolds was a professional and the devices were embedded in the architecture. They called a security team to sweep the house, but I saw the work order in their email and canceled it, impersonating Julian. When the team didn't show up, their paranoia deepened. They were isolating themselves. They fired the housekeeping staff, afraid of spies. They were alone in the big, cold house. And that was when I sent the package. I had Reynolds courier a waterproof envelope to the front door. No return address. Julian found it on the porch at noon. He opened it in the kitchen. Inside was a single item, a USB drive. He plugged it into his laptop. Elena hovered over his shoulder. The video played. It wasn't the footage of the murder. Not yet. I was saving that. It was footage from times inside the house, times from 10 minutes ago. It showed Julian pacing in the kitchen. It showed Elena biting her nails. It proved I was watching them right now. Then, text appeared on the screen, white, against a black background. Asterisk, I know what you did. The police get the rest of the footage in 24 hours. Unless. Asterisk, Julian stared at the screen. Unless what? He yelled at the laptop. What do you want? Money? We don't have money. The text faded and new words appeared. Asterisk, I want a confession. Written, signed, admitting to the fraud, admitting to the plot. If you confess, I will bury the murder footage. You go to jail for fraud, not life for homicide. You have until the party. Asterisk. The screen went black. Julian slammed the laptop shut. It's a deal, he whispered. Whoever it is. They want to pin the fraud on us to get a cut. We can't confess, Elena argued. We'll go to prison. Better than the chair, Julian shouted. If they have footage of the lake, that's capital murder, Elena. First degree. If we confess to fraud, maybe we get 5 years. We can survive 5 years. He was bargaining. He was breaking. But he misunderstood the timeline. The party referred to the event scheduled for tomorrow night. The celebration of life. Julian had organized a second, more exclusive gathering for his investors and the private lender. A desperate attempt to show stability and secure more loans. He couldn't cancel it. If he canceled, the investors would pull out and the loan shark would make his move. He had to host a party while being blackmailed by a ghost. The night of the party arrived. The house was lit up, desperate to look welcoming. I sat in the safe house, putting on my clothes. I wasn't wearing the drab wool of an invalid anymore. I was wearing a dress I had bought online, a sleek, crimson gown that looked like fresh blood. I pulled my hair back. I applied lipstick. My legs were strong. I could walk. I could run. I could kill. Reynolds handed me an earpiece. The police are on standby, he said. I sent the lake footage to Sheriff Brody 10 minutes ago. He's en route. He's pissed that his friend played him. He's bringing the cavalry. Good, I said. But I get inside first. You have a 10-minute window before the cops breach, Reynolds warned. Don't do anything stupid, Clara. I'm not going to do anything stupid, I said, checking the clasp of my purse where I kept a small, heavy voice recorder. I'm just going to make an entrance. We drove to the estate in silence. We parked the van a mile away, in the woods. I walked the rest of the way, moving through the trees like I had done the day I escaped the lake. The ground was familiar. I could hear the music from the house, jazz, upbeat, frantic. I reached the edge of the lawn. Through the French doors, I could see Julian holding a glass of champagne, laughing too loudly with a man who looked like he broke thumbs for a living. Elena was in the corner, looking pale and sick. The room was full of people who thought I was dead. They were drinking my wine, standing on my floors, celebrating the continuity of a life that Julian had stolen. I walked up the stone steps to the patio. The air was cold, but I didn't feel it. I reached the double doors. I didn't knock. I pushed them open. The rush of cold air hit the room first, making the candles flicker. Then, I stepped into the light. night. The crimson dress blazed against the monochrome of the black tie crowd. I stood there, tall, upright, alive. The jazz band stopped playing. The conversation died instantly. A glass shattered on the floor. Julian turned slowly, his face freezing into a mask of absolute, primal horror. He looked like he was seeing the devil. Elena let out a scream that wasn't human. "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. "I believe you have something of mine." I took a step forward, the click of my heels on the parquet floor sounding like gunshots. My life. The silence in the room was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, a physical force that pressed against the eardrums of the 50 guests holding crystal flutes of my vintage Dom Perignon. I stood in the doorway, the crimson silk of my dress pooling around my ankles, my spine straight, my legs, the legs Julian had told the world were dead, supporting me with the strength of reinforced steel. Julian dropped his glass. It didn't shatter immediately. It hit the Persian rug with a dull thud and rolled, spilling amber liquid like a stain of fear spreading across the floor. His face was a study in cognitive dissonance. His brain was trying to reconcile the corpse he had drowned with the woman standing before him, and the machinery of his reality was grinding to a halt. "Clara," he whispered, the word escaping his lips like a prayer he didn't believe in. You're walking." I took a step forward, then another. The sound of my heels on the hardwood was deliberate, rhythmic, a metronome counting down the seconds of his freedom. "I am walking." "Julian," I said, my voice calm, projecting to the back of the room where the loan shark was watching with sudden, intense interest. "It turns out that swimming for your life is excellent physical therapy, and climbing out of a muddy bank 4 miles from here does wonders for the circulation." Elena, who had been shrinking into the corner, suddenly lunged forward. She wasn't attacking me. She was panicking. She grabbed Julian's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. "You said she was dead. You said you watched the bubbles stop. You promised me." Julian shoved her away, hard. "Shut up." "Elena!" He turned to the crowd, his hands raised in a gesture of placation that looked more like surrender. "Everyone, please. This is a miracle. My wife, she's alive." He took a tentative step toward me, putting on the mask of the overjoyed husband. "Clara, darling, we thought we lost you. We've been searching everywhere," the police said. I held up a hand. The gesture was small, but it stopped him as effectively as a wall. "Stop performing, Julian. The curtain has already fallen." I reached into my purse and pulled out the small remote control. Reynolds had synced to the main projection system, the same system they were using to display a loop of my happiest memories. I pressed the button. The screen behind Julian, which had been showing a photo of our honeymoon in Tuscany, flickered black. Then, the video feed from the T-Tangent X wheelchair began to play. The image was giant, grainy, but unmistakable. The guests gasped as one. On the screen, the view was from my armrest, looking up at the dock. The audio blared through the expensive surround sound system I had installed last year. Asterisk. "She drowned. It's done." Asterisk. The voice was Julian's. Unmistakable. Arrogant. Then Elena's voice. Asterisk. "Are you sure? Did you see her go under?" Asterisk. Then the visual violence. The hands gripping the chair. The shove. The sky spinning. The splash. The dark water rushing over the lens. The room erupted. It wasn't polite murmuring anymore. It was chaos. People were screaming. Someone dropped a tray of hors d'oeuvres. The loan shark turned and walked out the back door, disappearing into the night. He knew a police raid when he saw one. Julian turned to look at the screen, watching his own crime played back in high definition. He looked back at me, his face crumbling. "Clara, wait. I can explain. It's out of context. It's a deep fake. Reynolds, it's that pie of yours. He doctored it." I didn't have to answer. The front doors burst open behind me. Sheriff Brody marched in, flanked by 4 deputies with weapons drawn. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't the friendly neighbor who came to the barbecues. He was a lawman who realized he had been played for a fool by a murderer. "Julian Vance." "Elena Rostova," Brody shouted, his voice booming over the commotion. "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Clara Thorne, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and grand larceny. Hands where I can see them, now!" Julian didn't fight. He didn't run. He simply collapsed. His legs gave out and he fell to his knees, sobbing. It was a pathetic sound, devoid of dignity. Elena, however, fought. She screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Julian. "He made me do it. I'm just the nurse. He said he'd pay me. He said she was suffering." I watched impassively as the deputies handcuffed them. As they dragged Julian past me, he looked up. His eyes were red, rimmed with terror. "Clara, please. I'm your husband. I love you." I looked down at him, smooth and cold as a marble statue. "You don't love me, Julian. You love the $11 million, and now you don't have either. Take him away." The aftermath of the party was a blur of flashbulbs and legal depositions. The video of the confrontation, filmed by half the guests on their smartphones, hit the internet before the police cruisers had even left the driveway. By morning, the hashtag number "The Woman Who Walked" was trending globally. The story of the paralyzed heiress who swam out of her grave to confront her killers captivated the world. But I wasn't interested in fame. I was interested in justice. The legal process was brutal and swift. The evidence I had collected, the wheelchair footage, the hacked emails, the attempted insurance claim, the text messages Reynolds had recovered from Julian's cloud account, was insurmountable. They turned on each other immediately. In separate interrogation rooms, Julian claimed Elena was the mastermind who seduced him into it, while Elena claimed Julian was an abusive tyrant who forced her compliance. The district attorney, a woman named Harper who had a zero-tolerance policy for domestic violence, didn't offer a plea deal. She went for the maximum. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified on the 4th day. I walked to the stand without a cane. I looked the jury in the eye. I described the cold water. I described the sound of my husband laughing as I sank. I described the 4 miles I crawled through the mud. When the prosecution played the video from the wheelchair, Julian couldn't even look at the screen. He stared at the table, a broken man. The verdict came back in 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Attempted first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud. The judge, a stern man who seemed personally offended by the betrayal of trust involved in a caregiver relationship, sentenced them consecutively. Julian received 25 years to life. Elena received 15 years. They were led out of the courtroom in shackles, and as the heavy oak doors closed behind them, I felt the final weight of the lake water lift from my chest. But the incarceration of my enemies was only the first phase of the resolution. The second phase was the reclaiming of my life. I filed for divorce the day after the arrest. It was granted immediately. I sold the estate. I couldn't live there anymore. The Victorian mansion, with its view of the lake, was too full of ghosts. I sold it to a developer who turned it into a boutique hotel. I hoped the guests enjoyed the view. I never wanted to see it again. With the proceeds from the sale and the $11 million Julian had tried to kill me for, I established the Surface Foundation. Its mission was twofold: to fund advanced spinal cord research and to provide legal and financial resources for victims of domestic abuse who were trapped by financial coercion. I wanted to be the lifeline I had to build for myself. I wanted to ensure that no other woman had to crawl through 4 miles of mud to get justice. I hired Reynolds as my head of security and chief investigator for the foundation. He grumbled about going corporate, but I saw the satisfaction in his eyes when we helped a woman disappear from an abusive marriage or exposed a fraudulent guardianship. We were a good team. The chaotic, rogue elements of his methods were tempered by my strategic oversight. We were efficient. We were ruthless. We were the sharks now. Recovery, however, was not just legal and financial. It was physical. My legs were strong, but the nerve damage from the original car accident, the one caused by the brake failure, which Reynolds later confirmed was sabotage by Julian tampering with the fluid lines, left me with chronic pain. Some days, my legs felt like they were on fire. Some days, they felt like blocks of wood. I spent hours in physical therapy, pushing my body to its limits. But the real therapy was the water. For a year, I couldn't go near a pool or a lake. The smell of chlorine or algae would trigger a panic attack so severe I would black out. I had nightmares of drowning, of the silt filling my mouth. But I refused to let Julian take the water from me. I refused to let him turn an element of nature into a weapon of terror. 18 months after the trial, I traveled to the coast of Maine. I rented a small, glass-walled house on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. It was winter. The ocean was gray and violent, crashing against the rocks with a primal fury. I stood on the deck, wrapped in wool, watching the waves. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. I hired a swimming coach, a retired Navy SEAL named Marcus, who understood trauma. We started in a heated indoor pool. He didn't force me. He just stood in the shallow end and waited. It took me 2 weeks just to put my face in the water. When I finally did, I screamed underwater, the bubbles carrying my rage to the surface. Marcus didn't flinch. He just nodded. "Good," he said. "Let it out. Scream until you're empty. Then swim." It has been 5 years now. I am sitting on the terrace of my home in the Amalfi Coast. The sun is setting, painting the Mediterranean in shades of violet and gold. My legs are propped up on the railing. They ache a little from the morning hike, but it is a good ache. The ache of use, not atrophy. I am reading a letter from a woman in Ohio. The Surface Foundation helped her escape a husband who controlled her medication and her bank accounts. She writes that she is safe now, that she has a job, that she is learning to drive again. She signs it, "Thank you for the lifeline." I fold the letter and place it on the table next to my glass of wine. I look out at the sea. It is calm tonight. Down on the private beach below, I can see my gear waiting. A wetsuit, fins, a mask. I don't swim in pools anymore. I swim in the ocean. I swim in deep water. I pick up my towel and walk down the stone steps. The air is warm, smelling of salt and lemon blossoms. When I reach the water's edge, I don't hesitate. I pull on the mask. I wade in. The water is cool, but not cold. It embraces me. I push off, my legs kicking with powerful rhythmic strokes. I dive down into the blue silence. I am 30 feet under, suspended in the weightlessness. I look up. I see the surface, a shimmering ceiling of light. But this time, I am not sinking. I am not drowning. I am visiting. I watch the light dance on the water, and I think of Julian, sitting in a concrete cell where the only view is a sliver of gray sky. I think of the bubbles rising from his lips in my nightmares, and I realize they are gone. I turn in the water, a slow, graceful arc, and kick toward the light. I break the surface, gasping not for air, but for life. The water streams off my face. I tread water, looking back at my house, at the life I built from the wreckage. I am Clara Thorne. I died in a lake in November, and then I decided to live. I turn onto my back and float, letting the current rock me gently. A survivor held in the palm of the immense, indifferent, beautiful sea. The $11 million sits in a trust, growing, helping others. The wheelchair rots in an evidence locker, and I am here. I am finally, truly here.